November 4th, 1979, Tehran. The sun rises over a tense and fractured city in the heart of Iran. Inside the U.S. Embassy compound, American diplomats stir awake to what should have been an ordinary Sunday. Coffee brewing, cables transmitting, the quiet rhythm of bureaucracy humming along. But beyond the compound walls, something darker is developing. A crowd gathers. It's more than a protest, it's a storm brewing. Chanting students surge toward the gates, fists raised, signs waving, their voices echoing with fury, death to America. They are young, radicalized, and emboldened by a revolution that has already overthrown one regime. Now they have their sights on another symbol of perceived tyranny, the American flag. Then chaos. The gates are ripped open, dozens of militants flood the embassy grounds, doors splinter, alarms pierce the air. Within minutes, 66 Americans are taken hostage, bound, blindfolded, and shoved into back rooms and basements. Some are beaten, most are terrified. The youngest is 20, a Marine assigned to guard the U.S. Embassy in Tehran. The oldest, he's nearing retirement. By the time the dust settles, 52 Americans will remain in captivity. Their world narrows to a single unrelenting nightmare: isolation, silence, and the terrifying uncertainty of tomorrow. This is not just a crisis. This is the start of a 444-day ordeal that will paralyze a presidency, humiliate a superpower, haunt America for generations, and give rise to decades of conflict between two countries. Welcome to Threat Level Red. I'm your host, Charles Denyer, and this is Episode 5, The Iranian Hostage Crisis and the Tragedy of Operation Eagle Claw.
Welcome to Threat Level Red, a Charles Denyer Productions podcast. Every week, Charles brings his real-world expertise to the front lines of America's most pressing threats: cyber attacks, extremist networks, rogue states, terrorism, economic instability, systemic breakdowns, and so much more. From the digital battleground to the streets of America, no threat is left uncovered. No spin, no filters, just intel.
In this episode, we'll unpack the dramatic standoff that gripped the world, the Iranian hostage crisis, and the bold, yet ultimately doomed rescue mission known as Operation Eagle Claw. We'll examine how the crisis crippled Jimmy Carter's presidency, cleared a path for Ronald Reagan's rise, and ignited a firestorm of political and military controversy that still resonates even today. But first, to understand the roots of the Iranian hostage crisis, we have to rewind a few decades. After World War II, Iran became a key player in the Cold War as they were strategically positioned and rich in oil. In 1953, the U.S. and Britain orchestrated a coup to overthrow Iran's democratically elected prime minister after he nationalized the country's oil industry. They reinstalled the Shah, a monarch who favored Western interests, but ruled with an increasingly authoritarian grip. For the next 25 years, the Shah remained a close ally of the United States, receiving military aid, training, and political support. But inside Iran, resentment was building. Many Iranians viewed the Shah as a puppet of the West, and opposition, especially among religious groups, grew louder. By the late 1970s, the anger exploded into revolution. In 1979, the Shah was overthrown, and Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini, a radical Islamic cleric, returned from exile to lead the new Islamic Republic. For Khomeini and his supporters, the United States wasn't just a foreign power, it was the great Satan, blamed for decades of exploitation and interference. Tensions reached a boiling point in October 1979 when the U.S. allowed the exiled Shah to enter the country for cancer treatment. Many Iranians saw this as a possible prelude to yet another coup. On November 4th, 1979, a group of Iranian students stormed the U.S. Embassy in Tehran, taking 52 Americans hostage, resulting in a 444-day international crisis that symbolized the deep rupture between Iran and the United States. But it's also important to remember that the Iranian hostage crisis that began on November 4th, 1979, is often remembered as a shocking and unexpected event. In reality, it was preceded by not one but two earlier attempts to actually seize the U.S. Embassy in Tehran. The first attempt occurred on February 14, 1979, when an armed guerrilla group stormed the embassy and took Marine Kenneth Krause hostage. Ambassador William Sullivan surrendered the embassy to avoid bloodshed. And with the help from Iranian officials, control was regained within hours. As for Krauss, though injured and tortured, he was released after 6 days. Then there was a second attempt planned for September of 1979. And while it never played out, it did set the stage for the eventual assault on the embassy on November 4th, 1979. These earlier incidents revealed that the hostage crisis didn't come out of nowhere. It had clear warning signs. At first, U.S. officials believed the crisis would be short-lived, but they were wrong, very wrong. That's next, so stay with us. And now back to the story. As Ayatollah Khomeini took control, by late November of 1979, his regime had fully embraced the hostage crisis as a symbol of resistance against U.S. interference, especially after President Carter allowed the deposed Shah, their hated monarch, into the United States for cancer treatment. Behind closed doors, Carter was torn, diplomacy faltered, economic sanctions floundered, and in private, he called the seizure an act of blackmail, a violation of diplomatic immunity. But each failed negotiation, each broken promise deepened his resolve and his desperation. Meanwhile, the hostages endured systematic degradation, forced to adhere to brutal routines, denied basic freedoms, and tormented by uncertainty. At home in America, the crisis became a national trauma. High oil prices soared. The Soviet invasion of Afghanistan rattled the world, and Carter's credibility started to crumble. In history's mirror, the hostage crisis marked a crisis of confidence for America, a moment that cast doubt on its global might and moral clarity. But in April of 1980, in the heart of the desert, beneath the blinding sun and swirling winds of eastern Iran, a bold plan was taking shape, one that would stretch across oceans, skies, and the very edge of military capabilities. Its codename, Operation Eagle Claw. Its purpose, to bring 52 American hostages home, alive. Diplomatic efforts had gone nowhere. Talks had stalled. Promises were broken. And behind the closed doors of Tehran, 52 Americans still sat blindfolded, trapped in silence and in fear. The world was watching, but nothing was moving. On April 7th, the Carter administration made its first decisive break. The U.S. State Department officially severed diplomatic ties with Iran. A message had been sent, but it did not bring the hostages any closer to freedom. Inside the White House, a deeper conflict was unfolding, one that would change the course of history. Secretary of State Cyrus Vance still believed in diplomacy. He warned against rash decisions. He feared what a failed rescue might mean, not just for the hostages, but for America itself. However, National Security Advisor Zbigniew Brzezinski had run out of patience. He called for action. On Thursday, April 10th, Vance left Washington for a quiet weekend in Florida, unaware of what was about to happen in his absence. The very next day, on April 11th, Brzezinski convened a surprise meeting of the National Security Council, where Carter authorized the daring mission, saying it's time for us to bring our hostages home. In that moment, the decision was sealed. There would be no more waiting, no more talking. The rescue was set in motion. Up next, Operation Eagle Claw goes into action. And now back to the story. The operation would unfold like clockwork, or so it was hoped. On paper, the plan was audacious indeed, incredibly complex, requiring synchronization of a large number of critical events. Immediately, there were private whispers from senior Carter officials and military brass that many moving pieces of Operation Eagle Claw were just that. Too many, too detailed, too daring. Regardless, 93 elite Delta Force operators would strike the U.S. Embassy in Tehran. A second team, 13 men from a covert Berlin-based Special Forces detachment, would hit the Ministry of Foreign Affairs to free 3 more hostages. Meanwhile, a 12-man Army Ranger unit would secure the dusty highway strip known as Desert One, which was a temporary landing zone carved into the Iranian wilderness. Another Ranger company would take over an airbase, clearing the way for a fast escape. And then the CIA, always in the shadows, had assembled a covert in-country team of 15 Iranian and American Persian speakers, some trained to drive the trucks that would carry the hostages to freedom. On April 24th, 1980, Operation Eagle Claw was underway as the first wave began with 6 hulking C-130s, call signs Republics 4, 5, and 6, and Dragons 1, 2, and 3 lifting off over 1,000 miles away. They carried fuel, gear, and more than 100 soldiers, all flying under radio silence, refueling midair over international airspace. Simultaneously, aboard the USS Nimitz, 8 massive U.S. Navy Sea Stallion helicopters, call signs Bluebeard 1 through 8, rose into the night and thundered toward the Iranian desert. Their journey, 600 miles to Desert 1, which again was a remote, dusty road turned makeshift airstrip. There, under the cover of darkness, the operation began to take shape. At 22:47, Dragon 1 landed in blackout conditions, guided only by infrared lights visible through night vision goggles. Jeep teams rolled up, securing the perimeter. Fuel bladders were laid down. 6,000 gallons of jet fuel ready to feed the hungry helicopters. Then a problem. A civilian bus full of passengers stumbled onto the road. Rangers halted it, detained the 43 Iranian civilians. Minutes later, a fuel truck then roared down the same path, ignoring warnings. It was likely smuggling fuel, but a shoulder-fire rocket put an end to its escape. The explosion lit the skies up for miles, a beacon revealing the secret location of Desert 1 to anyone watching. And still, the helicopters hadn't arrived. 2 hours into the flight, the desert began to fight back. Bluebeard 6, one of the 8 Sea Stallion helicopters racing toward the Iranian desert, suddenly veered off course. A cockpit warning light went off, and it was critical. A sensor had detected a crack in one of the main rotor blades. The crew sat her down fast in the middle of the vast moonlight silence. Out there in that hostile nowhere, they waited. Bluebeard 8 arrived to extract the crew. The crippled bird, which was Bluebeard 6, was left behind, intact, its massive frame slowly disappearing into the desert wind, forever abandoned. As the remaining helicopters pushed deeper into Iranian airspace, they flew straight into something no one had fully prepared for: a haboob, a monstrous wall of dust, hundreds of feet high, swirling with fury and blinding grit. Visibility collapsed, instrument panels flickered, communication was almost impossible. Inside Bluebeard 5, the cockpit turned dark. Electrical failures wiped out the flight instruments. The pilots were flying blind and quickly became disoriented. Lost inside the storm, they made the call to turn back. For them, the mission was over. Now down to 6 helicopters, the minimum number required for the rescue to proceed, there was no more room for failure. But the desert wasn't done yet. The remaining birds reached Desert 1, but they were late, and very late, between 50 to 90 minutes behind schedule. On Bluebeard 2, the last to arrive, limped in at 1 a.m., its secondary hydraulic system dead. Only one remained, holding the aircraft together with fragile hope. Inside the command tent at Desert 1, a deadly stalemate formed. Colonel Beckwith, commanding the Delta Force ground team, stood his ground. He would not shrink his rescue force, not after months of training. Senior pilot Major Seifert refused to fly Bluebeard 2, calling it unsafe. The minimum of 6 choppers had become 5. The plan could not proceed. Colonel Kyle, the aviation commander on the ground at Desert 1, advised Major General Vaught to abort the mission due to deteriorating conditions. This recommendation was relayed via satellite radio to the president. From half a world away, the word came back: heavy, final, and devastating. The president agreed. Abort the mission. After 2.5 hours on the desert floor, the mission was dead. The team would never reach Tehran. The hostages would remain in captivity. And the storm, both literal and political, well, that was just beginning. That's next, so stay with us. And now back to the story. The nightmare for Operation Eagle Claw wasn't over. In fact, it was just beginning. As the aircraft prepared to leave, fuel became an issue. One EC-130, already low from offloading its fuel, had to depart immediately, loaded with men and cutting it dangerously close. Then, tragedy. In the chaos of repositioning aircraft in the dark, Bluebeard 3, hovering blind in a dust storm, clipped the vertical stabilizer of a waiting EC-130. The helicopter's rotor disintegrated. The aircraft exploded into flames. 8 American servicemen were killed instantly. Others were badly burned. When the flames died down at Desert 1, what remained was silence and wreckage. 5 massive RH-53D Sea Stallions lay scattered across the dirt runway, hulking shadows against the dawn. Some were scarred by shrapnel. Others sat eerily untouched, almost like sleeping giants. They couldn't be destroyed. not because the team didn't try, but because each one was still packed with ammunition. To light even one would have risked a chain reaction, one that could ignite fuel bladders, cripple the C-130s still waiting to evacuate, and turn a failed mission into a mass grave. So, they were left behind. Abandoned, left for the enemy to claim, and claim them Iran did. Bluebeard 2 and Bluebeard 8, once American instruments of rescue and resolve, they were salvaged by the Islamic Republic of Iran, repainted, reflagged, reborn under a different banner, flying now for the very nation that had held American diplomats hostage. In the chaos, the remaining EC-130s lifted off. From there, the injured were flown to safety, and the dream of a swift, heroic rescue crumbled into history. Operation Eagle Claw was over. It had never reached Tehran. Khomeini declared the failed raid a divine victory. In Iran, his grip on power tightened. In America, the political fallout begins for Jimmy Carter. That's next, so stay with us. And now back to the story. By dawn on April 25th, 1980, Operation Eagle Claw had collapsed, not by enemy fire, but by mechanical failure, nature, and a devastating misstep. In the Oval Office, President Jimmy Carter received the news that 8 American servicemen were dead, helicopters wrecked, and the mission aborted. A grim silence fell over the administration. I remember speaking with former Vice President Walter Mondale, and he told me how Carter's face just froze. It went completely pale and white. He had never seen the president like this before. Within hours, the political aftershocks began. Secretary of State Cyrus Vance, a lifelong diplomat and staunch advocate of non-military solutions, submitted his resignation. He had opposed the rescue mission, warning it was too risky and premature. His departure marked a dramatic schism at the heart of Carter's foreign policy team. Vance's exit wasn't symbolic, it was seismic. His resignation, penned on April 21st, 4 days before the disaster, was effective immediately after the operation failed. In the days that followed, Carter's approval ratings plunged. A Gallup poll in June showed a collapse from 58% in January to just 31%, an implosion of public confidence during an election year. Republicans seized on Carter's perceived weakness, branding him an indecisive commander-in-chief. Ronald Reagan's numbers surged, capitalizing on public frustration. Under pressure, Carter addressed the nation on April 25th, taking personal responsibility for the failure.
Late yesterday, I canceled a carefully planned operation which was underway in Iran to position our rescue team for a later withdrawal of American hostages who've been held captive there since November 4th.
The public, already anxious about inflation, the Soviet threat, and the ongoing hostage crisis, heard their leader express contrition, but many felt it was too little, too late. Across the waters in Tehran, Ayatollah Khomeini declared Eagle Claw a divine triumph, praising the angels of God, a powerful narrative that further emboldened Iran's Islamic regime. And in Iran, the mission's failure became propaganda gold, reinforcing anti-American sentiment and strengthening theocracy at Iran's core. Back in America, the carnage led to introspection. Critics lambasted the inter-service coordination, planes, helicopters, pilots, special forces, and covert CIA units that failed to act as a coherent whole. The Holloway Commission would later point to insufficient helicopter backups, poor weather planning, and a fractured command structure as fatal flaws. As for Carter, he lost his re-election bid in 1980.
About an hour ago, I called Governor Reagan in California.
And why? Because of a perfect storm that engulfed his presidency. A faltering economy, an unresolved hostage crisis, and deep fractures within his own party. With inflation and unemployment soaring, a condition known as stagflation, Americans felt trapped in a worsening economic spiral. The lingering Iran hostage crisis, especially after the failed rescue attempt that resulted in U.S. casualties, further dented Carter's standing on national security. Internally, Carter was weakened by a challenge from Ted Kennedy during the Democratic primaries, fracturing party unity. Meanwhile, Ronald Reagan's upbeat rhetoric and polished communications, epitomized by his memorable debate quip,
"Are you better off than you were 4 years ago? Is it easier for you to go and buy things in the stores than it was 4 years ago?
offered a compelling vision of renewal and optimism that resonated far more effectively than Carter's message. The result? It was a landslide defeat for Carter. Reagan won 489 electoral votes to Carter's 49, capturing 51% of the popular vote to Carter's 41%. Yet as Carter's presidency came to an end, literally down to the minutes before Reagan was sworn in, 52 American hostages were still being held in captivity. But that was all about to change. Up next, Reagan's in, Carter's out, and the hostages are coming home. And now back to the story. While much of the world's attention focused on the pomp and ceremony of Ronald Reagan's inauguration on January 20th, 1981,
I, Ronald Reagan, do solemnly swear that I will...
Another powerful and far more intimate story was unfolding just a few time zones away. After 444 harrowing days in captivity, the 52 American hostages held in Iran were finally freed, just minutes after Ronald Reagan was sworn in, marking the end of one of the most painful chapters in modern U.S. diplomatic history. But in a deeply symbolic gesture, the very man who had agonized over their plight more than anyone, now a former president, Jimmy Carter, was chosen to greet them. No longer commander-in-chief, Carter's final journey aboard SAM 27000 came as a private citizen, dispatched by his successor, Reagan, on a mission of healing and dignity. The very aircraft that had once flown Carter around the globe as Air Force One now carried him in a different role. Not as head of state, but as a statesman in service to a deeply personal cause. What makes this moment even more extraordinary is a detail lost to most history books. By the end of its last presidential voyage in 2001, SAM 27000 had logged exactly 444 flights as Air Force One, a haunting parallel to the 444 days the hostages had been held in Iran. This almost unbelievable symmetry stands as a poetic reminder of how history sometimes writes its own metaphors, in flight logs as well as headlines. The freed hostages landed at Rhein-Main Air Force Base in West Germany after a grueling 13-hour flight from Tehran. As the plane doors opened in the pre-dawn chill, they were met by an exuberant sea of American flags, yellow ribbons, and the thunderous applause of more than 2,000 U.S. service members, students, and local residents who had gathered to welcome them. It was as if a sliver of American soil had been transplanted onto German ground, a vivid emotional preview of the hero's welcome they'd received back home. From there, they were transported to a military hospital where former President Jimmy Carter stood waiting. He greeted each one of them, tearfully embracing, shaking hands, and listening intently. He spent more than twice the scheduled time with them, moved by the raw emotion of the moment and the magnitude of their suffering. But the reception wasn't entirely smooth. While almost everyone welcomed Carter's presence and were deeply touched by his compassion, a few of the former hostages quietly declined to shake his hand or embrace him, resentful still of what they perceived as his administration's failure to resolve the crisis sooner. Carter later reflected on the high cost Iran paid for what he called its criminal act. Despite hopes for economic recovery, Iran ultimately regained less than $3 billion of the almost $12 billion in assets frozen by the United States after the hostages were taken. Still, that day was not about victory or vindication. It was about closure, dignity, and the long shadow of human endurance. Carter's mission wasn't one of celebration, but of quiet reckoning. In the pages of history, January 20th, 1981, is remembered as the day Ronald Reagan assumed the presidency. But for the hostages and for Carter, it was the end of a long, painful road, marked not just by politics, but by the emotional scars of captivity and the enduring hope for reconciliation. Sometimes history doesn't just happen, it echoes. But perhaps the real controversy surrounding the failed rescue attempt of the 52 hostages wasn't with Carter's decision to approve of the mission, Operation Eagle Claw, but rather the long-held suspicion by some that the Reagan camp was actually complicit in working behind the scenes with the Iran regime to withhold the release of the hostages. That's next, so stay with us. And now back to the story. In one of the most contentious and enduring controversies of modern American politics, whispers of secret dealings between Ronald Reagan's 1980 presidential campaign and Iran have refused to fade. At the heart of it lies a provocative question. Did members of the Reagan team deliberately sabotage President Jimmy Carter's efforts to free American hostages before the election, and in doing so, influence the outcome of a presidency? For years, this theory was known as the October surprise, a term originally coined by Reagan's own camp, fearing that Carter might time a hostage release to boost his re-election chances. But the theory eventually turned itself inside out. Speculation grew that Reagan allies may have acted first, sending covert signals to Iran to delay the hostages' release until after the election, effectively kneecapping Carter's last hope for political salvation. Now, more than 4 decades later, new testimony has breathed fresh life into this long-disputed narrative. In 2023, Ben Barnes, a former Texas lieutenant governor and a rising star in Democratic politics, came forward with a stunning admission. He revealed that in the summer of 1980, he accompanied his political mentor, former Texas Governor John Connally, on a multi-nation trip across the Middle East. Ostensibly, it was billed as a private diplomatic tour, but according to Barnes, the real agenda was far more sinister. At nearly every stop, from Jordan to Egypt to Saudi Arabia, Connally urged regional leaders to pass a message to the Iranians. Hold the hostages until after the election. Ronald Reagan will win and he'll give you a better deal. The trip, Barnes said, culminated in a meeting back in the U.S. where Connally personally briefed Reagan campaign chairman William Casey, who would later become CIA director. Barnes said he was unaware of the trip's purpose at first, but quickly realized the geopolitical game being played. His admission, confirmed by multiple sources familiar with his private disclosure over the years, adds a critical new dimension to the October surprise theory, one that had previously evaded official investigations. Though Connally, Casey, and other central figures have since died, records do confirm the trip occurred, and new evidence shows contact with the Reagan camp during that time. Still, no definitive proof has emerged that Reagan ever himself authorized or even knew of the mission. Yet the timing remains haunting. The hostages were released minutes after Reagan took the oath of office on January 20th, 1981, just as Carter's presidency expired. Carter's allies, long frustrated by the narrative that he failed to bring the hostages home, see Barnes' account as long overdue validation. According to Gerald Rafshoon, Carter's former communications director, if we had gotten the hostages home, we'd have won. This was pretty damn outrageous what they did. For Barnes, his decision to speak now was driven by conscience. History needs to know that this happened, he said. Carter didn't have a fighting chance with those hostages still in the embassy in Iran. And honestly, I don't think we'll ever get closure on this. What began as a tragic failure ended as a turning point, one that transformed how America would wage secret wars, rescue missions, and fight terrorism for decades to come. Up next, we'll explore how Operation Eagle Claw reshaped the U.S. military itself, from harsh lessons learned deep in the Iranian desert. Out of tragedy often comes rebirth. Operation Eagle Claw was no exception. The disastrous failure at Desert One did not mark the end of America's elite paramilitary efforts. Rather, it ignited a transformation that helped reshape how the U.S. conducts special operations. The primary institutional change was the creation of the United States Special Operations Command, more commonly known as SOCOM, this in 1987. Congress and senior military leaders concluded that no service was effectively integrating and equipping special operation forces, a problem laid bare at Desert One. Under SOCOM, Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marine special units finally gained unified command. Budgets became centralized, training became joint, planning became systematic. Eagle Claw was a textbook and costly lesson in why coherence matters. And the Navy's 160th SOAR, the Night Stalkers, they were born from the ashes of Operation Eagle Claw's debacle. They would become the primary Army aviation unit in low-altitude nighttime operations, and they proved their mettle in Panama, Somalia, and beyond, filling the void that the massive RH-53D choppers had left behind in the Iranian desert. And Delta Force? Operation Eagle Claw became their galvanizing adversary, a failed mission respected, mourned, and studied. Their doctrine was codified with red team exercises, hostage extraction techniques, and enhanced interoperability with other special units and intelligence agencies. By the early 1990s, Air Force, Navy, Marine, Army, and CIA operations were routinely interwoven in joint mission plans and training. SOCOM's mission: plan, execute, and sustain global special ops with intelligence, air support, logistics, and be in lockstep. The rebirth sparked by Operation Eagle Claw is not just institutional, it's spiritual. The belief that the United States will right its own mistakes. Stay with us as we bring to a conclusion the Iranian hostage crisis and the ill-fated rescue mission. And now back to the story one last time. It was April 24th, 1980, a night cloaked in tension, desperation, and hope. Operation Eagle Claw was conceived as a bold, high-risk mission, a complex orchestration of helicopters, jets, and elite troops flying into hostile territory deep inside Iran, under the cover of darkness. The stakes couldn't have been higher. But what unfolded was tragedy. Mechanical failures grounded helicopters. A dust storm blinded the skies. And amidst the chaos, a deadly collision at the desert staging site killed 8 American servicemen and doomed the mission. The hostages remained captive. The nation watched in stunned silence as the mission faltered, a bitter symbol of frustration and failure. And the fallout was immediate and far-reaching. For President Carter, the failed raid shattered the last threads of public confidence. His leadership was questioned, his resolve tested. The hostage crisis and the botched rescue became a defining wound of his presidency. It crushed any chances for re-election and opened the door for Ronald Reagan's rise, whose campaign capitalized on a promise of strength and renewal. But the mission's legacy goes deeper than politics. It exposed the limits of America's reach, the dangers of intelligence failures, and the cost of military ambition. It inspired sweeping reforms in U.S. Special Operations Forces and the restructuring of military command to prevent such a disaster from ever happening again. As we look back, we see a moment frozen between tragedy and transformation, a mission that was as much about hope as it was about heartbreak. The ghosts of Operation Eagle Claw remind us how thin the line is between success and catastrophe, and how history often hinges on decisions made in the shadows. Each year, Iranians gather at the remote desert site near Tabas, known as Desert One. Why? To commemorate the failed U.S. military mission, Operation Eagle Claw. The site where American helicopters crashed during the 1980 attempt to rescue hostages in Tehran has now become a symbol of divine intervention and national resilience in Iranian narratives. Wreckage remains on display, and an annual ceremony draws officials, clerics, and citizens, transforming a U.S. embarrassment into a celebrated chapter of Iran's revolutionary history. In 2015, when former President Jimmy Carter was asked what he would have done differently, his answer was as stark and haunting as the mission itself. "I wish I would have sent one more helicopter to get the hostages, and we would have rescued them, and I would have been reelected." That simple, profound reflection echoes through time, a reminder of the human cost behind every political calculation and every daring rescue attempt. In our next episode of Threat Level Red, the Kim Code, the secret society of North Korea, join me as we go deep inside the world's most dangerous regime. Thanks for listening. I'm your host, Charles Denyer. This is Threat Level Red.
Threat Level Red is a Charles Denyer Productions podcast. For more information, visit charlesdenyer.com to learn more about current and upcoming podcasts and episodes, current and future book publications, professional services offered by Charles, and much more. All opinions expressed are those of the host and do not reflect the official positions of any government agency, military branch, or national security organization.